Sup gang, Smalls from the Street Uni on the Gold Coast here again with this week's video tutorial. Through this video we're going to be looking at bubble letters, sort of the basics of bubble letter drawing, how to turn bubble letters into more of a graffiti throwy style piece, given that kind of graph funk to them, rather than just looking like bubble letters out of year 3 title page textbook kind of thing. This video will follow on from a few techniques that I covered in last week's video on tagging basics. So if you haven't already, go back and watch last week's video. You can scroll up in this section to find it. Give it a quick watch through and you'll kind of get the hang of a few techniques that I'm going to then progress into how to do bubble letters. In graph, this is kind of the next step from tags. Tags, like we went through the video last week, are kind of your very basic starting point of graph lettering, kind of like your signature or autograph, whereas the throwy letters are kind of a step closer towards pieces and kind of wild style lettering. So yeah, if you haven't, catch up on last week's video, and then we'll get into this week and it'll all kind of make sense for you. Sweet. So when I say graffiti throwy, in graph, a throw up or a throwy or a throw is basically like a very quick kind of bubble letter piece. It's kind of that next step from the tag. It's not just one singular line. It actually gives the letters some kind of depth to them. You can kind of play around with a few more effects and things. The term throwy sort of comes from throwing it up on a wall, doing something very quickly when you kind of press for time, because it's possibly in a little bit of a legal grey area what you're doing. Obviously that's not why I'm teaching you this video today. This is more for you to kind of play around and have a bit of expression with your own kind of tag and stuff. But yeah, that is sort of the history of the term throwy and where this kind of letters come from. And I guess that background is why this is intended to be still fairly simple and still fairly quick. We're not doing a full-on detailed, colourful piece yet. We're still keeping it, fairly kind of simple. And that is just the next step in that kind of graffiti evolution towards pieces. Sweet. So we'll get into it. I've got my iPad again hooked up so you'll be able to see what I'm doing. Now, bubble letters, pretty kind of basic. Most people have seen bubble letters before or sort of, have a rough idea of how to do them. If you sort of haven't before and you kind of want to technique on how to draw any kind of letter in a bubble style, I'll take you through one simple lesson that I teach. Now for this, I'm going to use the color red as like a lead pencil, and I'll use black that will represent like a texter or a marker. So if you're following along and you've got paper and some pencils and pens, what I do in red, you do in a pencil. What I do in black, you can do in like textures or a pen or a marker, whatever, because after we put the marker down, you'll then be able to get an eraser and erase the pencil, and you'll just be left with the bubble letter outline. Cool. So one trick on doing bubble letters. So sometimes it can get a little confusing, trying to do a letter that has like an outside kind of line that then has to eventually meet up somewhere and, it doesn't cross over kind of thing. So one way to kind of get your head around that is with whatever letter you're doing. Say I'm going to do the letter S, just like that, just a normal S. The way that I would then try and figure out how to do an S in bubble writing is I want to outline the letter that I've just done. So with my marker, which is black, I'm just going to draw an outline around that lead pencil. So the rule of this is the marker or whatever you are using to do that outline will never touch the line you've drawn in pencil. The black never touches the red. It always keeps a distant width away from that red line. So even when that black line comes back around to meet itself wherever you started, it'll meet that black line. It won't ever come in and hit the red line or anything like that. So then once I get my eraser and I get rid of the pencil line that we did, we're just left with the outline, which gives us a bubble letter. So that's now a bubble letter S. Now this can take a little bit to get the hang of, so don't stress too much if you didn't, completely get it that first time. I did that pretty quick. S's are fairly simple because they are just one line that makes up that letter. But there are letters obviously in the alphabet that have a few more lines to them. Let's take, for example, the letter A. So an A obviously has the outside, but then it kind of has the line through the middle. So the exact same rules apply. My black will never touch the red. Now, you might be tempted to keep this line going up through there, but you wouldn't, because there it touches the red and it crosses over. So this will run parallel with that line there. You're just outlining the outside. So you can see that's sort of an A, but if we got rid of the red now, you can tell it's not quite right because it doesn't have that bit in the middle. So if I just put that red back for a second, we need to draw an outline on the inside of this bit as well. Now when I get rid of the red, now it's a proper bubble letter A. So that will apply to any letter that kind of loops in on itself. So like the letter B, for example. I can do that outline around the outside, but I'll need to remember to come in and outline inside of these things as well. So there's a bubble letter B. So hopefully that's making a little bit of sense. And that's just one simple trick of how to do any letter in a bubble letter style. If you are getting a little bit confused with how it might look, just try drawing the capital letter normally as it is, and then using that technique to outline it. And you should be able to sort of figure out how that letter would look as a bubble letter. Now, what we want to kind of do is give this a little bit more of a kind of graffiti style to it, rather than just your kind of basic title page bubble letters. So a couple things that you want to keep in mind to give it a little bit of funk. I'm going to do an example with that S again. I'll do two and kind of show the difference. So if I did that outline, but I did that outline very close to that red line, like this, for example. That is going to look a little bit too skinny. So I'll go rid of this and show you. So see that it's still technically a bubble letter, but it doesn't really have that kind of funk to it that you kind of know graph letters are supposed to. So what you want to do is try and make that outline thick. So have a bigger distance between the outline and that first red line. So now I want to get rid of the red on that letter. See that already just by making it thicker, has a little bit more kind of funk to it. Looks a little bit more stylish. The skinny one looks a little bit awkward. So you kind of want to make them fat. You can kind of imagine like those balloons that spell like words like happy birthday, or you can get the big balloons that have like the number kind of thing on them. Imagine the letters like a balloon, and you want to really blow it up and make it fat. So the rule was that the black never touches the red, but the black can touch the black. So for the letter S, for example, and I've done it a little bit on this fatter one here, but I'll kind of show you what I mean. On this skinny one, the black isn't touching any other spots, but if I do it really fat, see there it touches, and here it touches. Because it's kind of so fat, it's sort of blowing up, almost, getting too chubby that it's kind of like blowing up on itself. And that can give it a little bit more kind of style as well. So we get rid of the red for that one. And even that one looks a little bit more kind of graph funk than this thicker one here. Sweet, so that's one trick. Make sure you kind of make your letters fat enough to look a little bit stylish and a little bit kind of chubby funky. Don't make them too skinny. Hopefully that's all kind of making sense, because we'll skip along now to another trick to make them look a little bit more kind of graffiti style. And that is where we're going to take a lot of the lessons that we learned last week in the tagging tutorial. So if you've watched last week's video, you'll remember that the way that we kind of made a normal letter look a little bit like a tagging letter was we came in afterwards, after we'd drawn the letter, and we added what we called like sort of tails or kicks to it, like bits off the letter. So what we want to do with the bubble letter is that same technique that we just did to outline it, but this time we want to use last week's technique to add those kind of extra bits to the first bit we're going to outline. So I'll get my red and I'll do another S. And this time I'm going to do the same S that I did last week when we were doing the tagging tutorial, which had these bits. And now I'm going to use the technique we just learnt of how to outline it, but this time I'll be outlining those extra limbs as well. Just like that. The black never touches the red, but the black can touch the black. So when I get rid of this on the inside, see how that, again, we've now taken another step to making that look a little bit more of a kind of graffiti style bubble letter. So you can do that same trick with any of the letters, just like we did with the tagging letters, how we would do any letter and find somewhere to maybe add a little tail or kick somewhere. You can do that with any letter, and then when you outline it like this technique and include that little kick or whatever, that'll turn that into a bit more of a kind of graffiti style letter. Sweet, so hopefully that's making a bit of sense. And don't forget, with those letters that kind of have a loop in on themselves, like the A and the B, you'll need to still include that bit in the middle. So for example, let's do the letter R. So that's my normal R. And following our rules from last week of giving it like kicks and stuff, I might give this one a little tail back here, and I might make this whip back a little there. Now I'm going to outline that. And I'll remember that I've got to do an outline on the inside of this bit here as well. Now, before I get rid of the red, you'll notice that what I'm trying to do is roughly keep the same distance with the black from the red the whole way around. So this sort of distance in between those two lines here, it's not, like, you don't want it to be, you know, you don't need it to be exactly the same, but it's roughly that same kind of width. So on the inside there as well. Now that'll kind of give you a good idea of, you know, how sort of far away you want that outline to be. If you try and keep kind of a rough, similar distance away from it all, you can see that these are all similar kind of widths. Hopefully that makes sense. So now if I get rid of the red line of this one, if it wants to work, there we go. You can see that that's a bit of a graph style R. Super simple. Cool. So yeah, you can do same technique for any letter. Now there are some letters that you might sort of struggle with how to actually make them look kind of stylized. A good example is the letter O. So even last week when we were doing the tagging, I was kind of saying that the letter O, you know, obviously it's just one line that meets up in itself, so there's not really any corners or sections where that line ends to then add a kind of tail or something. So sometimes on the letter O, you can just keep it nice and simple, especially, you know, if it's like in the center of your word, having all the letters around it kind of funky, and then just having this nice clean O in the middle can just look cool just like that. Or you can also do, with our tagging style, was just kind of add something inside. Now that can get a little bit tricky trying to do all this outlining stuff. So you can, like I said, keep it like a normal letter. You know, that just kind of looks like a big donut sort of thing, but that's going to look like a bubble letter O next to all these other letters. But the other thing you can do is think that this is like a balloon and it's super inflated, and this bit in the center isn't even open up. It's actually just like so pumped up that it's squished together. Now you could turn that into like an X or like an exclamation mark or something. You could feel super thug and give it like a dollar sign, really whatever. And now that looks, you know, obviously that looks odd on its own there. It just looks like I've drawn a dodgy coin. But when that's in a piece and it's next to all the other letters, that'll look kind of cool. You might see as well that in the piece I drew, just quickly for the sort of title of this, I've given that O just a little character space, just because I thought it would look kind of funny, and so it does. So you can totally have a play around. Again, similar to last week's tutorial, there's not really any rules or right or wrong way to do any of this. This is all like a personal kind of self-expression. Sweet. So now that we kind of have the hang of doing individual letters in a bubble letter style, we'll look at turning that into like a piece and putting all those kind of letters together to give you a bubble letter word rather than bubble letter individual letters. So what we can do is similar to the tagging tutorial. If we go back to that kind of technique again, what we did last week was we started by just writing out the letters in just normal capitals. I'm gonna have to move that over. So this is how we started our tagging technique last week. We just wrote it nice and simple, and then we went through and added those limbs. So that's how we're going to start again. But this time you can keep it a little bit more simple. You don't have to go too wild. And this time we're not going to include the bits that we put on the outside of the tag as well. So last week I was saying, you know, to do like if you wanted like these things on the outside and like crowns and halos and stuff to make it look a little bit unique. leave those out of this for now, because at the moment, just doing bubble letters, that's going to make this look like enough unique without that stuff on the outside too. We'll get to that later. So I've basically just drawn the very start of the tag that we did last week in last week's video. But now, this time, I'm going to try and outline these letters. So what I've done is given each letter a little bit more space in between, because I'm going to have like the outline of the S and the outline of the M, and I'm going to need room for them. If you draw them too close together this early, it'll get a little bit confusing, and those outlines will all just kind of cross over. It'll get a little bit complicated. We'll get into how to kind of put those together in a sec, but for this first one, just leave those letters a little bit separated with a bit of space for the outline in between. So the same technique that we just learned. I'm just going to go through and just give each letter an outline. Cool, so just like that. Now we're still super early with this technique, so don't stress too much that this doesn't look, this doesn't look like that yet. Eventually we'll get to that kind of stage. This is sort of the steps to get there. So I've just outlined all my letters. Now you see that the A and the L got a little bit close. If they touch each other on this step, that's fine. What you don't want to do is totally cross them over each other. So if I had have done my A like this, and then my L had have gone like that, that's going to get too confusing. So if they do touch at this step, what you want to do, well, just like that, is have it so it almost looks like one letter's kind of tucked in behind the other one. So you do the L, and if it touches, you can kind of stop and then think about where it's actually going to come. It's going to come around there, and it's going to start back up here. So you can start it from there. So now I'm going to take my eraser and get rid of my pencil. So if you've drawn your letters in pencil, like my red, where my red is, you can go through, rub out all those lines. Hopefully you've done the black in like a pen or a texter, or at least something that's not going to rub out. And once I get rid of those red lines, you can see now that that's starting to be like a bubble letter word or piece rather than just individual letters. And it's got that little bit of a graph kind of style funk to it because we've included like the limbs from our tagging video. Sweet. So that's starting to look kind of cool. It's obviously still not quite there yet. Still not looking like, this kind of complete throwy. And one of the reasons for that is because of the space in between the letters. And that is fine for now. That makes this step a lot easier to get the hang of. But now we're going to look at trying to put those letters, like butt them up so they're next to each other. They're kind of overlapping a little bit, which is similar to what we did in last week's video when I showed you how to kind of take the tag from looking like individual letters and actually make them sort of touching each other or starting just where the previous letter has finished. So it actually makes it look more like one kind of unified word rather than letters on their own. So we're going to use that technique again with the bubble letters. So you can use the pencil outline trick for this one again if you want to. And what you'd kind of want to do is put those letters with your pencil a little bit closer together this time. So if you need to do that, use that technique to kind of get the hang of it. I'm going to skip ahead because you've seen me do that technique, so you don't need to see me do it again. I'm going to skip ahead now and know that that's the shape of my bubble letter S, that's the shape of my bubble letter M, and so on. If you want, you can do this on another page or the same page, and that way you've got these letters already there as a reference, so you can look at them and remember how they're supposed to look. So this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to do that same bubble letter S as I did above. And now I'm going to do my M, but instead of having all this distance between the S and the M, I'm going to make the M so it's tucking in just behind that previous S. And in doing that, that's going to put these letters much more kind of unified, and that's going to turn them into this one sort of piece that you see the whole word as one. It's also going to take them from looking like just skinny tagging letters to actually kind of fat letters that have depth, because one can kind of be behind the other one, which makes the one that's in front look like it's kind of coming forward. So my M, what I'm going to look at is my M sort of goes, this bit is sort of the furthest bit sticking out. That is going to meet up with this bit of the S, which is kind of the furthest bit sticking out that way. So on this one, that's the bit that I want tucking in behind. Now I can see up here that that bit, what's going on here? Sweet. So this bit here is going to tuck in behind this bit here. So I'm going to start at this line here, because I know that this bit there is going to be hidden behind this. Now the rest of the letter will be the same. The basic way to do this from the start is to make each letter tuck in behind the last one. So that time, all I had to worry about was this part of the M. The rest of the M I do the same, because I know that A is going to tuck in behind the M. I don't need to worry about this side of the M just yet, because it's going to be in front. So you're going to see all of it. Now, similar kind of thing with the A. This bit's the furthest bit sticking out, and it's going to line up about here on my M. Oops. So it's going to tuck in about there. Now, if you're struggling with like where to tuck the letters into each other, or how to sort of do this bit where you kind of start at an odd section of the letter and don't include that other bit that's tucking in behind, what you can do is get your pencil again and just draw the full letter as is, crossing over a little bit from the last one. So my L, if I did it in a pencil, it's going to cross over the A there. So I can see that that's my full L. And now with my marker, I can see where it's going to be showing and where is going to be hidden behind the A. So I can go over all this stuff that's outside in view. Then I can get the eraser and get rid of this stuff that's going to be hidden behind the A. Sweet. So the L, tucking in behind the previous L. And the final S, tucking in behind this L. Cool. So you can see that one compared to the one above is starting to look more like one piece with graph letters rather than individual bubble letters. So making the letters fat and making them overlap each other are two really simple tricks to making it look like a fat throwy piece. Cool. So now these letters are obviously pretty shaky because I'm just kind of doing that example SketchUp, but you can take as much time as you need to try and like get these letters nice and crisp and get them into this kind of style where you crisp up those edges. But otherwise, we're fairly close to that kind of final step of it looking like a throwy. So now that we've kind of done that, you can look at what I was saying we did last week with the tags, with like the quotation marks on the outside and like, you know, exclamation marks and crowns and things. You can see on this one I've done some quotation marks. Oops. I've done these on this side and I've done an exclamation on that side. The drips as well. Can look kind of cool. So you can have a bit of a play around with yours and just kind of see if there's things that you want to add to the outside. So you can do like the quotation marks, for example, on the outside, kind of like big teardrops sort of thing. You can do like an exclamation mark or whatever really. The same outlining rule will apply. So if you kind of like, oh, I don't know how to do an exclamation mark in a bubble style, same deal as, you know, you're just gonna outline one. So there's your exclamation mark. Hopefully that makes sense. Same rule pretty much with the quotation marks. Oh, I've done this in the wrong color. Yes, you just outline them. There you go. Pretty straightforward. So you can have a play around and add those kind of things to the outside of your letters as well. Sweet. So that is the basics of our bubble letters. Now, one of the things that you'll notice is really separating this piece here from this one is the 3D shadow. So obviously on this one I've put in that kind of 3D bit to make it look like it's popping out. Gives it a little bit more kind of style rather than just looking like skinny bubble letters drawn on a page. This step is a little bit harder to teach. So I might even do a whole video tutorial just on making letters look three-dimensional and doing different types of shadows. So for now, have a play around with just getting the letters in a way that you're happy with, getting them overlapping each other and stuff. That will then help with how we do the shadows, because you can see the shadow for this, it's one continuous thing. Because all the letters are overlapping, there isn't any big gaps in between them, so there won't be any big gaps in the shadow, and that's going to make the shadows heaps easier to do when it's one big shadow for the whole piece. Also have a play around with colors now. You know, now you can get pretty expressive and put in your kind of favorite colors and stuff. Like I was saying at the start, I guess a throwy is something that in graph you can throw up pretty quickly on a wall. So it's not technically the kind of thing that you would be putting heaps of colors and effects and details into. Nothing to say you can't, you're drawing this at home. That's not illegal, so there's not going to be any cops chasing you. You're not going to have to run away quickly or do this super quick, spend your time on it. If you want, put some coloring into it. Keep it simple if you want as well, just to kind of keep that traditional graph throwy kind of style. You can fill the inside in one whole color. You can do different effects with the colors. A lot of throwies you'll kind of see colored in really quickly, almost like a zigzag sort of pattern, which will then just make it have that connection to kind of a graffiti throwy sort of style. Obviously this is pretty rough. You can take a little bit more time on that, but that kind of style can look cool. Once you sort of fill the inside of the letter, let's go a nice blue. Say I fill in, come on, work for me. Obviously I'm cheating because the iPad can do some pretty cool things, but say you've just colored in these letters blue, what you can have a look at afterwards is putting some colors around, so around the outside of the piece as well. So I want to choose a nice pink, that looks cool, and I'm going to highlight it, which is basically just a nice bright color just on the outside, similar to the outlines we were doing for the bubble letters. So I'm doing this pretty quick and rough because you'll get the idea, but you want to keep this highlight nice and clean up against the outline. Get inside these sort of bits as well. So this is obviously a pretty straightforward step that if we were doing a sort of real piece, I'd take a bit more time, making it look a bit more crisp and clean, but I think you will get the idea of what a highlight is. It's pretty straightforward. Sweet, so there's my highlight, nice bright pink, makes the blue kind of pop, pretty contrasting. Then I can, if I want, add some sort of some bubbles in that same color. So it sort of looks like that highlight's kind of bubbling over. Now again, this is just, you know, one of many possible techniques and effects you can do. No right or wrong. You do you. You can do like stars, peace signs, whatever, but like we said, remember we're still not at a full wild style piece yet, so we're keeping it still fairly simple. Sweet. You can do drips as well. A lot of these kind of effects, you know, will come from the fact that the history of all this is using spray paint. Sometimes spray paint kind of bubbles, it runs, it drips, and sometimes, you know, kind of actually drawing those will give it that more of a kind of nod to the history of graph and where it's kind of come from. And we'll look a little bit more of a kind of graffiti style as well. Sweet. So there's the basics of our bubble letters and our throwies. Obviously, here's one I prepared earlier. When you spend a little bit more time on the colors and stuff, this is kind of what we're aiming towards. So, sweet. Don't expect to be a master at this just after a quick half-an-hour video. Like I said last week, if you don't suck at something, you'll never be good at anything. Take a bit of time if you want, practice it. The more you do it, the better you're going to get. Like anything really, like all forms of art, practice makes perfect, but it takes a lot of practice to get there. Hopefully this video's made sense. Keep an eye out for next week's workshops and next week's video as well, where I might go through that three-dimensional stuff I was talking about, and then eventually we'll get into kind of doing some wild style sort of letters as well, the real kind of graffiti sort of style stuff. Sweet, hope you enjoyed. Enjoy your weekend. Peace out.